Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I have a slightly less fun and more of a deep kind of video, but I thought it would be good for you to get to know me better, get to know a bit more of my background, and you know, even though it's deep, it is an interesting story and might give you some insight into the mental health care in the UK, well, at least my experience of it. So I do want to issue a little trigger warning. This video will discuss eating disorders, mental health, depression. So I would like to preface that because I do not want to trigger anyone, and if you think you would be triggered, that's completely fine. Go watch another one of my videos. So this is going to be me telling you the story of when I was in an inpatient psychiatric hospital as a teenager. So basically, I was admitted to this inpatient hospital when I was 13 years old. So an inpatient hospital is where you go and basically live there. So I was admitted there because I was very unwell. I was basically diagnosed with anorexia. So I had to go in this hospital because I couldn't get better out in the community, so living at home. And yeah, this is the story of my experience. So also in this video, I will be talking about how some of the staff behaved and acted towards us as patients, but I do want to make it clear that this was not all of the staff. There were also some amazing staff members in the hospital, and ultimately being in the hospital was the reason that I recovered from my eating disorder, and I'm still here today. So I did write down some notes so that I could remember all the important things. Obviously, this happened about 10 years ago. It is quite a while ago. A lot has happened in my life since. But basically, when you were first admitted to this hospital, you are put on something called SOBS. So that is supervision 24/7, because obviously when you are admitted to this hospital, you are very, very unwell. This was an NHS hospital in London. So it was slightly far from my home. My home is in Surrey, but honestly nowhere near as far as some of the girls had to go. So some of them had their families living super far away, which is really scary, especially when you're this unwell. You know, we were close to death, really. Eating disorders have the highest mortality rate of any mental health illness. And when you are a young teenager or child, I think the people in this hospital were ages 12 up until 17. It's very, very scary. And the reason some people were in this hospital, even though they lived super far away, is because there are nowhere near enough, or at least there were, but I don't think much has changed. There are nowhere near enough hospitals for mental health or for eating disorders in the UK, and this is due to major underfunding of the NHS. Obviously, we are extremely, extremely lucky to have a free health service. I love the NHS. I think it's something that needs to be protected at all costs. However, because it's free, it requires insane money, and unfortunately, mental health was nowhere near treated as a priority, so that was reflected in our care. Anyway, I did go slightly off tangent there, but being on supervision basically means we were watched 24/7. So I turn up to this hospital, have a meeting with my parents there and a nurse. They get all your information, all your history, everything possible, you know, look through all your medical records, talk to you about your eating disorder. And then you were brought into this living room area. So there was different living rooms depending on your supervision level. So when you first joined the hospital, you are, as I said, on SOBS. So we went to the SOBS living area, and basically there are a load of patients and a load of staff there. I will be referring to the patients as girls. Well, there was only one boy during the time I was there, and I was actually living there for 6 months. So yeah, quite a long time, especially as a 13-year-old terrified girl who was very unwell. So being supervised 24/7 includes being watched whilst you're on the toilet, being watched whilst you're in the shower, being watched while you're sleeping, just being watched all the time, and that's a very interesting experience. But yeah, that's what 24/7 supervision is. There were also higher levels of supervision for patients that needed it, such as one-to-one, which means there was one staff member to one patient, so they have someone literally on them all the time. With my level of supervision, they would be supervising like a group of us. And then you can also go 2-to-1, 3-to-1, depending on the patient's needs. So anyway, I come to this hospital, I'm immediately put on meds and start therapy. We had so much therapy, which is amazing. Obviously, it's very important. So every week you'd have a solo therapy, a meeting with your key worker, a meeting with your psychiatrist. You'd have group therapy, family therapy, and this other therapy, I think it was called CRT. That was an interesting one. So yeah, a lot of therapy, a lot of talking about feelings, and a lot of trying to recover. So also, when you first get there, you are weighed and you are put on a strict calorie meal plan. So they will tell you the amount of calories you are on to consume every day. I think when I first got there, because I was so severely underweight, I had to suddenly start eating about 4,000 calories a day. And obviously before that, I was having close to nothing. So it's huge. It's a huge thing to wrap your head around. And how they do it to make sure you get the exact calories is they would cook meals for us and weigh out specifically every ingredient in every meal so that it was the exact calories. So we had different kitchens depending on your stage in recovery. When you first got to the hospital, you would be in the caterpillar kitchen, and this was where you were all the patients would sit at a table, and you'd have a couple of staff members and nurses also sitting at the table watching you, basically to make sure you don't try and get away with not eating any of your food. So to do this, when we would have a meal, we would have to tie up our hair, in case we would try and, put food in our hair. Had to have short nails in case you'd try and put anything under your nails. You have to obviously keep your hands on the table. And we were timed to eat. Basically, eating disorders are insane. And when you are in that level of illness, you will do absolutely anything to try and do what your eating disorder says. So you have to be very, very heavily supervised and controlled to make sure the eating disorder can't get away with anything. So each meal had different times we had to eat in. We'd have breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, and then we'd have like squash in the evening. So the thing was, if you did not finish your meal in the time zone, you would not be allowed to leave the hospital. So for example, every day we'd go out on a walk with the staff members. If you didn't eat your food in time, you would not be able to go on this walk. Also, often parents would come visit at the weekend, and depending on the stage of your recovery, you might be able to go out for the day with your parents. If you weren't eating on time, you would not be able to leave, as I said. Then there comes the if you don't eat at all. So their first level to deal with this would be to give you a calorie replacement drink, so a huge milkshake. The one they used was called Ensure. There's also 40 Sip. So these are drinks that they give malnourished children. They're often used in countries with a lot of poverty and malnutrition, and we would then be expected to drink that in a certain time. if the patient couldn't do this, unfortunately, the next step was to be tube fed, which was a very traumatic process. You'd be held down and restrained, and a nurse would put a tube up your nose going into your tummy so that they would connect that to enteral or forticip, and that would be basically you being forced to consume the calories. So as you could tell by now, everything in this hospital was insanely strict. So to make sure no one could get away with anything when we were eating, at the end of our meal, we would have to scrape the plates. They had to be spotless, clean. So at the end of every meal, there'd be like a cacophony you would hear of plates being scraped. You couldn't leave a tiniest crumb on a plate or cutlery, and you'd have to show the staff and have them approve it. Also with your drinks, you would have to drink every last drop so that when you held the glass upside down, no drops ran out, and you would also have to show this to the staff. This had to be with water as well as, drinks like squash. We couldn't have water if we were thirsty. We could only consume anything when we were told to. And unfortunately, during these meal times, sometimes some sad things would happen, because it's really hard if you're sitting around all these other girls. If one person doesn't start eating because they're really struggling, you all kind of feel in competition with that to have the worst eating disorder, as messed up as it is. And sometimes we'd all sit there and the nurses would say to us things like, you're being so selfish, you're being attention seeking, you're the reason she's not going to recover. They could be really, really horrible. And sometimes if one patient would not finish her meal, even if we were all finished, we would not be allowed to leave the table in a way to kind of pressure this patient and make her feel bad, because we're all sat there having to watch her not eat. And yeah, that was pretty messed up as well. We didn't lose any weight through exercise, because part of an eating disorder is not always, but often involved with compulsive exercise. For example, when I was ill before I went to hospital, I wouldn't let myself sit down because, I heard that you burn more calories standing up. If I did have to sit down, I would run my legs. This was the level of, unwellness. So before I was in hospital, I'd be sat at school running my legs under the desk, and my classmates were like, what's going on, girl? So yeah, that's the level of, obsession your head goes to. Before going to hospital, I would also always have the window open, because you hear that you burn more calories being cold. Just lots of things like that. So when we were in this hospital, they would control everything, including how we sat. So you always had to have both feet on the floor. You always had to be showing your hands. This was also to make sure you're not hurting yourself. So when we were sleeping, we always had to have our arms out of the covers and in view. So basically, even if, say, I did a stretch, they would class that as an exercise. If you bend down to get something from a lower shelf, that's classed as an exercise, and this was not allowed. And basically, if you did something like that, you would get a prompt. And if you got 3 prompts in a day, you would be punished. And this is very funny to me now, but our punishment was a biscuit, because obviously they know an eating disorder hates that. But I do think it's a bad punishment because it reinforces that food is bad. Do you know what I mean? Not ideal. If you got a biscuit, that was kind of the end of the world for you, basically. So because we were so unwell, we also had to have OBS checked. And depending on your level of unwellness, it would depend on how often this happened. But when you first got there, I think it was every 20 minutes, and this would be throughout the day. So you would get your temperature taken, your blood sugar levels taken, and your blood pressure taken. And through the night, every 20 minutes, if you were on this level of observation, the staff member would come and shine a torch in your face to make sure you're okay. And if you were on a really high level of supervision, which basically I was in A&E before going into this hospital, they would have to come and wake you up about every half an hour to do your obs. Also, when I was in A&E, I had to have a blood test every morning, which was not very fun. But anyway, the A&E is a whole other story. I'm not gonna lie. So after you graduated from the caterpillar kitchen, you would go up a level to the butterfly kitchen. And in this kitchen, you would eat with the other patients, but also some staff members would eat with you. So this is different from the first kitchen, as the staff would not be eating with you. And this was like a level up, you're getting a bit better at eating or whatever. For the most part, this was fine, but sometimes the staff members that were there were so ignorant. I don't even know if they realised what hospital they were in. For example, we'd be eating and the staff member would be eating with us and they'd say, "I don't know how you can finish that. I don't know how you can eat that much. I'm so full." And it's like, are you insane? We have to eat this much. We're not allowed to not eat this. Like, how triggering for someone with an eating disorder. Like, it blew my mind. I also had staff members ask me for weight loss tips. I'd have staff members, so if they were supervising us overnight, they would often bring snacks, which is fine, whilst we're sleeping, you know, to keep them going through the night. And I remember staff members bringing in green tea and telling us, you know, "Oh, I'm on a diet, I'm trying to lose weight." Obviously, this isn't a huge deal, but it is in an eating disorder hospital when you have patients on the verge of death from their eating disorder. In the eating disorder hospital, everything is very highly emotional, very triggering. For example, no one was allowed to use the word fat. That was like a swear word there. Like, it is high levels of anguish and stress. So staff members saying things like that was beyond unacceptable. So to progress through your recovery journey, we were given different challenges every week. The first challenge would be to have a dinner on site with your family. So your family would come in, it would be supervised by a staff member, and you would eat your dinner in time, etc. The next level would be to have a dinner on site with your family, but without the staff member supervising. Then the next level would be to have a packed lunch off-site, and you had to do that 2 weeks in a row. And then you had dinner in a restaurant 2 weeks in a row. And then you would be eligible for home leave. So you would be able to go home for a day or two a week. This was slightly interesting because when I would go home, I moved to a brand new secondary school. So I joined this school, but I would only be going in for 2 days a week, and I was the new girl. So at first it was really hard to settle in and make friends. Also, at this time, I had to go sit in a staff building and be supervised eating my lunch by a member of staff. So it was really hard to make friends at first. But anyway, that once I had left the hospital and didn't need to be supervised eating anymore, it was fine. But yeah, this was all just a crazy, intense experience. If you couldn't pass, you know, your challenge that week, you would have to try again the next week and, you know, keep trying until you passed it, basically. To be honest, I'm not even beginning to explain the extremity of the situation. There's just too much to say, and also it's just very, very depressing. I mean, I saw some crazy things in there with, you know, such sick and unwell people. Another rule we had was that after dinner, or any meal, we wouldn't be allowed to go to the toilet, even if you were supervised, for an hour after. And this was obviously to make sure you're not trying to get rid of anything or make yourself sick. But I remember having a lot of close calls in that situation because, you know, sometimes you're desperate, but no, it was not an option. They would have you wet yourself rather than go to the toilet. So obviously we still had to learn and not lose loads of schooling. So we did have a hospital school. We had one on site if you were right at the beginning of your recovery journey or on, you know, high supervision level. And then we had an off-site school, and it was so good. Obviously this is when, because I turned 14 in hospital, this is when I need to be learning for my GCSEs. And obviously the teaching level was not very high because you're very unwell, but it was amazing to get off site and go to this school and use your brain and have a bit of a distraction. We'd have a little timetable of all the different subjects, and yeah, that was a really great thing for us. We'd also sometimes have trips off-site, so if you were at the lowest supervision level doing really well, you'd be able to go on these trips, and these were so much fun as well. Stressful but fun. So for example, we might go pottery painting, we visited a farm, can't remember what else, but it was good to go out. We went to the cinema as well one time. And then also, if you're on the lowest level of supervision, we were taken swimming every week. We'd have yoga, people come in to the hospital. So on this level, that's amazing. You know, they really tried to help us in our recovery. It was just a shame the parts that were not so helpful. And also a thing to note is the thing with getting mental health support in the UK is that it's all based on your physical need, well, especially with eating disorders. So the skinnier, the lower in weight you are, the more likely you're going to get help, which may make sense to you, but this is actually not at all logical. You can be extremely unwell with an eating disorder and not at a really low weight. And also because the lack of funding, the lack of hospital beds, the threshold was insane. You had to basically be on death's door. And I was told as a patient in A&E that if I wanted to get a bed in one of these hospitals, which I felt I needed, I knew I couldn't do this at home, I was told that I needed to lose more weight. And this is what doctors told me in A&E, where I'm in A&E because I'm already at a dangerously low weight. And that is the NHS mental health system, or that was. Obviously, this was 10 years ago. But obviously, you may have noticed that I have a lot of scars as well. This was due to the trauma of the mental illness, but also the more visible scars I had, the more help and support I was given, which again is completely messed up. You shouldn't have to show physical harm for them to believe how much pain and anguish you're in mentally. But I can now get on to slightly more positive things, and that is the friendships and support of the other girls that I had in the hospital. I would have not recovered without them. When I first got in, I thought this is going to be really hard. This is going to be such a competitive environment. But actually, the group of girls I was with, we all were rooting for each other to get better. And that obviously, if one of us is getting better, that would help all of us try to get better. The support I had from these girls, we were a family. We would be so cute. We would make each other little cards and supportive messages. We would really root for each other, comfort each other, be there for each other. And that is what got me through my experience there. It was amazing, to be honest. So at every meal, you would have this placemat that you made, this laminated placemat, and it would say things like motivational quotes or do it for your family, do it for future you, things like that. And we would also have a name card in front of our seat, and that would also have motivational messages. And often me and the girls would make these for each other. It was really cute. We also had this thing called internal post. So every Sunday, you'd put all the patients' names in a hat, you'd pick a name out, and this would be the person you have to make something for that week. So we did really cute things like make each other motivational cards, or maybe you'd make someone a little bracelet from loom bands, I don't know, but it was something we all really looked forward to. It was the sweetest thing ever. Another thing was, in this hospital we were allowed no phones, obviously no access to the internet, so we would write letters to communicate with our friends and family. So a lot of the time we spent would be writing letters to post out to our friends and family and making stuff for each other. This is basically all we did all day because there wasn't much else to do. We'd have to just be sat all day in these living rooms. There was TV, but they heavily monitored what we watched. Obviously, we weren't allowed to watch anything to do with food, basically. Anyway, I had such a tumultuous journey. It was not straight. I would have ups and downs, highs and lows. It was probably, well, definitely the most traumatic thing I have experienced in my life. But eventually, after 6 months, I was finally discharged from the hospital and had to continue my recovery back at home. And once I left the hospital, I was nowhere near recovered. Obviously, I still wouldn't say I'm fully recovered today, but I was still in a very bad way. I did relapse a lot when I left hospital. I went back to a lot of my really unhealthy ways. I did have to go back to the hospital briefly, but obviously I'm here today and I survived. I survived anorexia, which is something I'm really proud of. And I'm so proud of everyone I was with who survived it too. So there are so many more things I could say, but I think these are the main things I just wanted to tell you about my experience in the hospital. I mean, I wrote diaries whilst I was there and I haven't looked back through them. I'm sure if I did, I would remember so many more things that happened, so many more details, but I don't think I can face looking at that at this stage in time. But yeah, these were the main points I wanted to get across. Those girls that I was there with will forever be in my heart. They were the most important people to me, and I was so lucky to be there with them. Oh my God, so annoying, so emotional. Oh, I just realised I've had lipstick on my cheek the whole time. Anyway, I wanted to show you this tattoo. This is a tattoo I got when I turned 18. It's my first ever tattoo, and this is a symbol of recovery from an eating disorder. So yeah, this is a special tattoo for me. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I promise my videos are not always this deep. I have so many fun videos, so make sure you go check them out. I do vlogs, just all sorts of videos, to be honest. I do videos with friends, challenges, cooking, trying food. I love food now. Crazy, right? Actually crazy. So yeah, make sure you go check that out and check out my free OF link below so you can come chat to me. I really love getting to know you, and you'll get access to all of my exclusive content. I'm actually sitting in an Airbnb today where I've been getting so much new content for you that I know you will love. So make sure you go check it out. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again very soon.